The ballroom sparkled like a dream. Golden lights floated over polished marble floors, the orchestra played a soft tune, and the air smelled of roses and champagne. Everyone looked perfect, famous faces, donors, politicians, and friends. They had all come to celebrate Eleanor Blake's 65th birthday, a woman known for her elegance, her kindness, and her charity foundation that had changed hundreds of lives. Eleanor stood near the grand staircase in a vintage silk gown, pale blue with silver lace that shimmered under the lights. She smiled gracefully as guests greeted her, but behind her calm eyes was a quiet unease. Something in the air felt wrong. Her son Daniel stood by the bar, holding hands with his fiancée, Vanessa Cole, a tall, beautiful woman with perfect posture and a smile that looked sweet but never reached her eyes. Vanessa had joined the family 2 years ago, and ever since, Eleanor had sensed her hunger for power. She was the kind of woman who treated kindness as weakness and flattery as strategy. Eleanor had ignored it. For Daniel's sake. Her only child, her heart. After her husband Richard became more distant over the years, more businessman than husband, Eleanor's world had revolved around her son. She wanted to see him happy. But lately, she saw less of the kind boy she raised and more of his father, cold, proud, and too focused on money. Still, tonight wasn't the night to think of that. This was supposed to be about joy, about her life's work, her foundation, her family. She forced a smile as the host announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, please raise your glasses for Mrs. Eleanor Blake, 65 years of grace, success, and generosity." Applause echoed. Cameras flashed. The spotlight turned to her. She took the microphone and began softly, "Thank you, all of you, for being here. Tonight isn't just about age. It's about..." But her words stopped. Cold liquid splashed down her shoulders. Gasps rippled across the ballroom. Her silk gown darkened as golden champagne dripped down her arms. She blinked, stunned, and turned slowly. Vanessa stood right behind her, an empty glass in hand, a tiny smirk on her face. For a second, no one moved. The music stopped. The photographers froze mid-click. "Oh no," Vanessa said loudly, fake-shocked. "I'm so sorry." My hand slipped. She turned to the crowd, still smiling. "Guess that's what happens when the champagne's as cheap as the charity, huh?" The room fell silent. Her words echoed like thunder. Eleanor felt the crowd's eyes burning into her. Some guests looked away. Others pretended to check their phones. At one of the tables, her foundation's board members exchanged awkward smiles, unsure how to react. The hostess laughed nervously, trying to ease the tension. But the damage was done. Vanessa leaned closer to the mic, voice soft but sharp enough for everyone to hear. "Now everyone can see," she said. "Your donations aren't really for the poor, are they, Mrs. Blake? They're just for show." Her mother, Loretta, standing in the corner, nodded proudly like this was planned. Eleanor's husband, Richard, sat stone-faced, not standing up, not defending her. And Daniel, her son, froze completely, his eyes darting between his mother and his fiancée. He didn't say a word. Eleanor's throat tightened. She felt her heart pounding in her chest. Her silk gown clung to her skin, sticky with champagne, her hair now shining under the harsh light. She could feel humiliation burning through her, the sting of betrayal sharper than the cold drink running down her neck. But Eleanor Blake didn't scream. She didn't cry. Years of surviving boardroom politics, fake friends, and her husband's quiet rejection had taught her control. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was power waiting. She looked around slowly, meeting each stare. People expected her to run, to break, to fall apart. But instead she smiled, small, calm, terrifyingly composed. She turned to the DJ and said quietly, "Play the video." The DJ looked confused. Eleanor repeated with steady eyes, "Play the video." The giant LED screen behind the stage flickered. The crowd shifted, whispering. Was this part of the event? Some tribute? Some speech? Eleanor held the microphone again, her voice gentle but heavy with meaning. "Vanessa," she said, "since you believe the truth should be public, let's make it public." The lights dimmed. The music stopped completely. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, the kind that makes hearts race and cameras ready. Vanessa frowned, glancing at her mother. "What are you doing?" she hissed under her breath. Eleanor didn't answer. She just looked straight ahead, her face expressionless, her eyes cold and knowing. The first image appeared on the screen. An office, a document, a woman's trembling hands signing something. People leaned forward to see. Vanessa's jaw tightened. She took a step back. Eleanor whispered, almost to herself, Let's finish what you started. And in that moment, drenched in champagne but standing tall under the spotlight, the birthday woman stopped being the victim of the night. The celebration that began with golden lights was about to turn into a storm of truth. The ballroom turned silent as the screen flickered behind the stage. The lights dimmed until only the glow from the screen and the trembling reflection of champagne on the floor remained. The crowd leaned closer, whispering nervously. Vanessa stood frozen, still holding her empty glass, the smirk slowly fading from her face. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "What are you doing?" Eleanor didn't reply. She just looked at her calmly, eyes steady, heart pounding under her soaked gown. She had waited months for this moment. She just hadn't expected it to happen like this. The screen showed the inside of her own office, her desk, the walls lined with awards, and a nervous-looking woman sitting across from her. The woman on the video was Loretta Cole, Vanessa's mother. Her voice was shaky. "I didn't want to do it, Mrs. Blake," Loretta said on the screen. "Vanessa said you'd never notice the missing funds. She said the foundation was too big, that no one would check." Gasps spread through the room like wildfire. Some guests covered their mouths. Others turned to look at Vanessa. The young woman's face went pale. "That's fake," Vanessa shouted suddenly. "She edited that. It's not real." But Eleanor lifted her hand, quieting the crowd. "Wait," she said softly. "There's more." The video continued. Now it showed Loretta signing papers, bank transfers, company accounts, all linked to small businesses under Vanessa's name. The voiceover was Loretta again. She said we could move small amounts through the shell accounts, that the money would come back later. She said no one gets hurt. Eleanor felt a familiar ache in her chest. She had given her whole life to building the Blake Foundation, scholarships, hospitals, shelters. And this woman, who called her mother in public, had used her son's love to reach into that goodness and poison it. Vanessa tried to shout over the video, but her voice trembled. "This is manipulation. She's twisting everything." Eleanor turned to her, eyes sharp but sad. "You called my charity fake tonight," she said, her voice low. "But it was you who turned it into business." People started filming on their phones. The press at the back of the hall whispered to each other, recording every second. Daniel, Eleanor's son, stood frozen, his face drained of color. His hands trembled. He looked from his fiancée to his mother, unable to speak. The woman he had loved for 2 years now looked like a stranger. "Daniel," Vanessa pleaded. "You know me. Tell them this isn't true. Say something." But Daniel didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the screen, where another recording had just begun. This time it wasn't Loretta. It was Vanessa herself. She was sitting at a cafe, talking on the phone, unaware of the security camera above her. Her voice clear and confident. "Eleanor is too soft to notice anything. Once Daniel's name is on the papers, we'll control the board. Her image will cover everything we do." A murmur swept through the room. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Oh my God." Vanessa stumbled backward, her heels scraping the marble. "That's taken out of context," she yelled, her voice cracking. "You can't do this to me." Eleanor spoke again, calm as ever. "You did it to yourself." She turned to the audience, the donors, and the press, the same people who had just watched her humiliation moments ago. Her voice was steady, every word landing like a stone in water. "For months," she said, "my team noticed missing donations. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe that someone my son loved could steal from sick children. But when I found out, I recorded the truth. Not for revenge, for protection." Her husband, Richard, finally stood, his face red with embarrassment. "Eleanor," he began, but she stopped him with one glance. "This foundation," she continued, "was built to help others stand tall. Tonight, I'll stand tall too." The video ended. The screen went black. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then the sound of clapping, slow, hesitant, but real. Someone started it, then another joined, and another. Soon, the ballroom that had mocked her was applauding her courage. Vanessa's hands shook. She turned to Daniel, tears filling her eyes. "You believe me, don't you? You know she hates me. She set me up." Daniel stepped back. His voice was barely a whisper. "You lied to me. You used me." Her mascara smudged as she tried to hold on to him, but he pulled away. "Daniel, please." But it was too late. Security, acting quietly on a signal from the board, approached her and her mother. They didn't resist. The room watched in tense silence as the two women were escorted out of the gala. Eleanor didn't look away. She watched until the doors closed, then took a deep breath. Her hands were trembling, but her voice, when she spoke again, was calm. "Now," she said, turning to the audience, "shall we continue with the celebration?" A few awkward laughs followed, but most people were too stunned to move. The air had changed, the music, the glamour, the fake smiles, all replaced by a strange respect, heavy and quiet. Eleanor handed the microphone to the host and walked off the stage. Her gown was still wet, her shoulders sticky, but her steps were steady. Every camera in the room followed her, not out of pity but awe. Behind her, Daniel stood alone, his heart breaking in silence. As she reached the exit, Eleanor paused and whispered to herself, "Happy birthday to me." Then she left the ballroom, leaving behind the lies, the laughter, and the people who had once thought she'd stay silent. The morning after the gala, the headlines were everywhere. Charity Queen exposes fraud at her own birthday gala. The champagne humiliation that backfired. Every news channel replayed the moment the champagne hit Eleanor's gown, followed by the video that changed everything. Some showed her calm face as Vanessa shouted. Others played the scene where Daniel stepped back, realizing the truth. The internet called it the champagne twist. But Eleanor didn't turn on the TV that morning. She sat quietly by the window, watching the sunrise spill gold across her garden. Her phone buzzed endlessly with calls, messages, interviews, but she ignored them all. She had already said what she needed to say. The truth was out. Now came the silence that always follows a storm. Her assistant, Clara, walked in with coffee. "Mrs. Blake," she said softly, "the board wants to meet. They're calling it an emergency session." Eleanor nodded. "Of course they are," she said with a small smile. She walked into the boardroom 2 hours later, dressed simply in a gray suit. The same people who had laughed awkwardly during her humiliation now stood up to greet her. The chairman cleared his throat. "Eleanor," he began carefully, "we're sorry for what happened last night. It was an unfortunate event." Eleanor looked at him steadily. "Unfortunate," she repeated. "That's one way to describe attempted embezzlement." No one spoke. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. She continued, her tone calm but firm. "I built this foundation to help people who can't speak for themselves. But last night, I realized something. Silence can be just as cruel as lies. And too many of you stayed silent when you should have spoken." Her words hit the room like quiet thunder. A few people lowered their heads. The chairman tried to respond, but she raised her hand. "Don't worry," she said gently. "I'm not here to argue. I'm here to step down." Gasps filled the room. "Step down?" someone asked. "You can't." "I can," she said softly. "And I will. The foundation will continue under a new director. I'll remain a silent advisor, nothing more." For a moment, there was only stunned silence. Eleanor smiled faintly. "Sometimes," she said, "you can only rebuild something by letting it go." She walked out of the meeting with her head high, leaving the board whispering behind her. Outside, reporters waited with cameras, shouting her name. She stopped briefly and spoke just one sentence. "I have nothing to hide. And that's the best gift I could give myself." Then she stepped into her car and drove home. That evening, Daniel came to her house. He looked exhausted, his eyes red. She opened the door and for a moment neither spoke. Then he said in a trembling voice, "Mom, I'm sorry." Eleanor smiled sadly. "Come in, sweetheart." They sat in the living room. The same room where Vanessa once laughed, pretending to be part of the family. Now it felt empty, almost peaceful. "I didn't defend you," Daniel said quietly. "I froze. When she humiliated you, I just stood there. I should have said something." Eleanor touched his hand gently. "You were shocked," she said. "You loved her. Love makes people blind, Daniel. I know that better than anyone." He looked at her, confused. "You mean Dad?" She nodded slowly. "Your father and I built everything together. But when pride enters love, it changes the shape of it. I spent years being silent, thinking dignity meant not fighting back. But last night, I learned something. Silence only helps the wrong people." Daniel looked down. "I didn't just lose her, Mom. I lost the version of myself that trusted too easily." Eleanor smiled softly. "Good. Now you can become the version that sees clearly." They sat in silence for a while, the sound of rain tapping the windows. It was strange. The storm outside felt calmer than the night before. Later that night, Richard came home. He had been avoiding her all day. He stood by the door, still in his tuxedo, tie loose, face pale. "You planned it, didn't you?" he asked quietly. "You knew she'd try to embarrass you." Eleanor didn't deny it. "I didn't plan the champagne," she said. But I planned to protect myself if she ever crossed the line. Richard sighed. You've always been 2 steps ahead of everyone. No, she replied. I just stopped trusting people who mistake kindness for weakness. He hesitated, guilt in his eyes. I should have said something last night. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. You should have said something years ago. He lowered his gaze. You're right. She didn't shout, didn't argue. She just said softly, You let them mock me in public, Richard. That silence spoke louder than any insult. He swallowed hard. I'm sorry, Eleanor. She nodded, not angry anymore, just tired. You don't owe me words, she said. Just honesty. For once. Richard nodded, unsure how to respond. He left quietly after that, and Eleanor didn't stop him. She didn't need him to stay. That night, as she lay in bed, Eleanor looked at the faint stains on her silk gown hanging near the closet. The smell of champagne was still there, sharp and bitter. But instead of feeling shame, she felt peace. That gown was no longer a reminder of humiliation. It was proof of her strength. She closed her eyes, whispered to herself. I didn't lose anything last night. I just saw who everyone really is. And for the first time in years, she fell asleep without fear, without pretense, free. A month passed since the gala. The news stories had faded, the gossip had cooled, and the world had moved on, but Eleanor Blake hadn't. Not because she was bitter, but because she had changed. Her mornings were quiet now. No board meetings. No reporters. No forced smiles. She spent her days walking through her garden, writing notes for the new director of the foundation, and having tea with the people she actually helped, the women and children whose lives her charity had rebuilt. The world saw the gala scandal as drama. Eleanor saw it as a beginning. That morning, she received a small box in the mail. No name, no sender, just a cream envelope tied with a gold ribbon. Inside was her old foundation badge, the one that used to say chairwoman. Attached was a handwritten note from the board. We miss your leadership, but we understand your choice. Thank you for showing us what integrity looks like. Eleanor smiled. It wasn't pride she felt, it was peace. The kind that comes after a long storm finally ends. That evening, she hosted a small charity dinner. Not at a fancy hotel, not under chandeliers, but in the garden of her own home. Long wooden tables covered in white cloth, small candles, and the laughter of real people who had once been her cause, not her audience. Her son, Daniel, helped serve drinks, joking with the guests. His eyes were softer now, humbler. He had started working at a youth center that Eleanor's foundation once funded. He didn't talk about Vanessa anymore, but sometimes Eleanor caught him staring off quietly, healing slowly. Her husband, Richard, arrived late as always. But this time, he didn't bring business calls or excuses. He walked up to her with a gentle look. You look beautiful tonight, he said simply. Eleanor smiled politely. You haven't said that in years. He nodded. I should have said it sooner. I should have said a lot of things sooner. She didn't answer right away. She looked at him for a long moment, then said softly, The thing about silence, Richard, is that once it breaks, everything sounds louder, including regret. He lowered his head. I don't want this to be the end. Eleanor looked toward the guests, the laughter, the music, the life that had returned to her home. It's not the end, she said gently. It's just no longer the same story. He nodded, understanding more in her calm tone than in any argument they'd ever had. As the night deepened, Eleanor stood and raised her glass. The candles flickered against her face, and the garden fell silent. Friends, she began softly, tonight isn't a gala. It isn't about cameras or reputation. It's about people who helped me remember why I started everything in the first place: kindness, honesty, and hope. The guests listened quietly. She continued, A month ago, I thought my name was all I had. But names fade. What matters is what we do when people try to ruin it, how we stand when it's easier to fall. A woman in the front, one of the single mothers her foundation had supported, wiped away tears. Eleanor smiled at her, then said, This dress I'm wearing tonight. She paused and laughed softly. Yes, it's the same one from the gala. Champagne stains and all. The crowd chuckled gently. I could have thrown it away, she continued. But I didn't. Because this dress reminds me that respect can't be washed off. Not by words, not by shame, not even by champagne. Everyone clapped softly, some smiling through tears. Then Eleanor did something unexpected. She took off the diamond brooch from her gown, a gift from her husband long ago, and placed it into a small auction box beside her. This, she said, will be sold tonight. Every penny will go to women starting over after betrayal. Because they deserve more than pity, they deserve new beginnings. Her voice cracked a little, but she didn't hide it. We've all been spilled on by life. But the difference between a stain and a story is how you wear it. The audience stood up, clapping louder now. Some cheered. Others just smiled, their faces glowing in the candlelight. Eleanor blinked back tears, her heart full. For the first time in years, the applause didn't feel empty. It wasn't for her image. It was for her courage. Later that night, after everyone left, the garden was quiet again. The air smelled of flowers and smoke from the candles. Eleanor walked alone to the auction table. The gown she wore shimmered faintly under the moonlight, the faint stain still there, like a shadow that refused to disappear. But she didn't want it gone. She gently folded the gown and placed it into a donation box labeled, "Proof that dignity survives champagne." She signed the tag herself. As she looked up at the stars, she whispered softly, "They tried to ruin me, but they reminded me who I really am." Her husband stood by the doorway, watching silently. Her son walked out behind him and wrapped his arms around her shoulders. "Mom," Daniel said quietly, "you're the strongest person I know." Eleanor smiled and kissed his forehead. "Strength isn't about fighting," she said. "It's about not letting cruelty change your kindness." The three of them stood together for a moment, not a perfect family, but a healing one. When the night grew colder, Eleanor looked back at the donation box and said softly, "That gown will help someone else rise again. That's all that matters." Then she turned off the garden lights, took her son's arm, and walked back inside. Behind her, the moonlight fell over the box, and the faint champagne shimmered like gold.